All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. This is a responsive crowd. My name is Mike Light. I teach U.S. history here at Grand Rapids Community College, and I'm the chair of the social science department. And I want to thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedules to attend what is the final day of our department's race and ethnicity conference. Today I have the pleasure of introducing a colleague of mine, Professor Vurusic. Gordan has a extensive background, including multiple degrees, so this might take a little while. So I want to read you this just so you get a sense of where he's coming from. He has a master's in international politics from the Central European University in Budapest, a master's in international economics from the University of Amsterdam, a master's in political philosophy from Bowling Green University, and he also conducted some PhD work at Indiana University focused on political science. This is his third year at GRCC, so let's please give Professor Vurusic a warm welcome. I'll just say, I think probably there's going to be some time for questions, whether he allows it, during his talk or at the end. I'm going to have a microphone, and I'll be walking around the room with it. If you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand, and I'll bring the microphone to you so we can hear it on film, okay? Not to put any extra pressure on you. It'll be okay, okay? You can use the microphone. Gordon?
All right. I wish everybody a very good afternoon. I think Mike did mention, so I'm originally from Croatia, therefore the strange accent. Croatia is a small country in Europe, around 4 million people, but Croatia is hoping to get into the European Union on the 1st of July 2013. So by default, I'm claiming expertise in the European Union, although my country is not in the European Union yet. I entitled this presentation, Europe Walls, Gates and Fortresses, because I would argue at the very beginning that the politics of immigration, not only in Europe, but all around the world, is going to be probably the most contentious political issue of 21st century. Why is that? Because many countries are basically seeing a surge in immigration from the places that do not share their original culture. People who are coming to Western countries usually do not share their habits, their religion. They do not share the, perhaps, certain values of the local population. On the other hand, Western countries, I'm talking mostly about European countries. Many European countries are under very strong financial strain, as we saw in Greece, right? Greece is collapsing financially. I mean, Greece has so many people who work for the government, basically. So if you are a medical doctor, you are a government employee, right? If you are a college professor, you are immediately government employee, right? Unless you teach at very few private universities in Greece. So simply, the country of Greece and many other countries in Europe, Italy, Portugal, Spain, even partially France, are not capable of sustaining that many people on the payroll. Right? Another cause of financial collapse of Europe and immigration as a big political challenge is the fact that the West, the United States and Europe, are not economically alone in the world anymore. Right? There's a competition from others. Fareed Zakaria, a political scientist who also has a pretty good program on CNN, he calls it the rise of the rest. So the rest of the world is rising in terms of having more and more economic power, much more than before. Right? In political economy, we have created an acronym called BRIC countries, B-R-I-C, right? That stands for Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Right? 4 very large countries that are basically challenging Western economies, especially Western European economies. Right? And so the Europe, the West, right, is not alone in terms of economic power. There is much higher level of competition. Part of this competition in labor, I mean, the average Chinese factory worker earns around $2.22 per hour. Right? $2.25 per hour. That's a 100% increase from 5 years ago. 100% increase, that is. Right? Part of the competition that is coming from these places is also industrial structure. Right? It's not, Western countries are not only moving their production of the things they sell only because the cheap labor, they're also moving it because it is easier to innovate while producing in China, for example. Right? Chinese factories are so placed so that if you're producing an iPhone in China, producing iPhone in the United States would cost between $10 and $50 per unit, more than in China. But that wouldn't cut so much the profit of Apple, but Apple is saying, well, but there is another thing. So there's another thing in the sense that if you want to change something on the iPhone while the iPhone is being made, right, they can just walk across the street almost and ask that factory to change that. Right? Here, if you made iPhone in the United States, you would have to call a factory in Wyoming right? to change that, and that would take 2 weeks. Right? So the world has become much more competitive. Right? And because of the world has become much more competitive, and because the borders, to a certain extent, have become more open, right? We are seeing immigration as one of the biggest challenges, probably the biggest challenge of politics in the 21st century. Another challenge that European countries are facing, and not only European, but Western countries are facing, is the challenge of people living longer lives. Right? So because of the advances in medicine, right, people live longer lives. So if you live in a European country that has a traditional pension system, which is basically telling you that you're entitled to a pension from the government. Right? In Europe, the pension is coming from the government. You have to pay, the government has to pay that pension for much longer time than 30, 40 years ago. Another problem in Europe is basically the fact that Europeans do not make many babies. They are, some of my friends in Germany are telling me, why is it that we would make babies? Why would we born children to such a bad world? So they are not making many babies. So the many developed countries in Europe, and most of the countries in Europe are developed. So many Western European countries are having a negative growth rate, which means negative birth rates, which means more people die than they are born per year. So United Nations Demographic Council is predicting that if everything remains the same, in 50 years Germany will lose half of its population. Germany has around 88 million people. Imagine all these nice beer restaurants in Germany empty. Or Italy. Italy is almost in the same position. Italy is losing population much faster than it is gaining. Right? So Italy also will lose, in 50 years, if everything remains the same, Italy is going to lose almost 40% of the population. I mean, that's a huge number, 40%. Italy has around 55 million people, right? If you lose 40%, that's 22 million people, right? In 50 years. 50 years is nothing. 50 years is nothing, really. Imagine all these beautiful palaces and walls and squares and gelaterias and restaurantes, right? All empty. Who would come? So Europe is in need of immigration. We need people. Because if you don't have people, you don't make anything, right? The more people you have, the more likely you are to have the growth in your gross domestic product. Right? So Europe needs people. Europe needs immigrants. Europe needs people to come from outside of Europe, right? Because people from developing countries are more likely to produce babies than a bunch of stiff Europeans. Right? Yeah. So, but on the one hand, we need people from the outside, but on the other hand, Europe is afraid of them. Europe is scared. And they're scared for a number of reasons. I think one of the most important reasons that they're scared, well, is economic reasons. Europe used to have at least a very cushy welfare state. So I remember when I lived in Netherlands in the mid-90s, when I was doing one of my degrees, the government of the Netherlands would finance your study by the time you were 27. They would just give you money to study. Not only did they give you money to study, but they would also give you a stipend, a monthly stipend to live on, until the age of 27, between 18 and 27. In Sweden, if you have 3 children, you don't have to work because the Swedish government is paying you to raise children. They're not enough, so you get a salary from the government until the children are 18, right? So Europeans are afraid that influx of immigrants will threaten these welfare policies, right? There will not be enough money to go around. But also very important reason why Europe is afraid of immigrants from outside Europe, right? We are not afraid of Brits coming to our country. We are not afraid of people who look and think like us, right? But we are afraid, or Europeans are afraid of people who are of different religion and different skin colors. Culturally, they're saying these people do not share our values. However, this is also at the same time in tension with the strong European liberal principles. Probably the first democratic revolution in the world, well, maybe the second one after American one, the French bourgeoisie revolution, 1789, fraternité, égalité, liberté, right? Brotherhood, and equality, freedom, right? These are the principles on which the Western set of values, also on immigration, are founded. I mean, the United States is not only accepting immigrants because it needs immigrants for economic reasons, right? The United States accepts immigrants because it accepts these values too, right? France accepts immigrants because it has this value, right? I mean, the West is based as a idea. The idea of the West is based on this idea of liberal principles, right? When I talk about liberal, I'm not talking about a liberal democratic party here in the United States. I'm talking about classical political liberalism, right? In which we are all equal, we are all brothers and sisters, right? And we all have freedom from the bad intrusion of the government. And that's what Immanuel Kant was writing about when he wrote about liberalism. And so we have this tension. On the one hand, Europe needs immigrants for economic reasons primarily. Right? Europe sort of abstractly wants immigrants for ideological reasons because of these liberal principles. Right? But on the other hand, Europe is afraid of immigrants. Right? Afraid of immigrants because of economic and cultural reasons. So how do we reconcile this tension? Right? How do we reconcile the tension between needing immigrants and being afraid of them? What do we do, right? What do we do in order to reconcile that, right? I would say ideological aspect of reconciling that tension is what they call the gospel of globalization. Globalization is sort of, I don't know, there are like at least 1,000 definitions of globalization. Does anybody have a definition of globalization? Yes.
It's like the process where like everyone's economic systems and operation is becoming equal and the same. It's never ending though. It's kind of the philosophy.
Could you repeat that? I didn't hear very well.
It's like the idea that everyone's economic and practices in their country are becoming the same,
Okay.
but it's never ending according to anthropology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the definitions of globalization. I mean, definition of globalization, what you said is basically the countries accept the best practices, how to do things, right? How to do politics, how to do economics, how to do cultural issues, right? They look at each other and somehow we accept the best practices of doing so, right? That's probably one of the possibilities. But then the critics of globalization are saying, well, but who determines what the best practices are? Right? You can say practice. I mean, if you say what is the best practices, is it claiming that the best practice is the practice with highest benefit and lowest cost, right? But how do we define cost and benefits? Right? It's another can of worms. Does anybody else have a definition of globalization? You're smiling, you do? No? No? Yes, Maria.
Okay. Is it like a worldwide type thing? Is that what the global that you're looking for, like the worldwide?
Yes,
type?
yes. I like the French version. It's sexier. It's called mondialisation. Right? If you say it in French, everything is good, right? It's a mondialisation, right? But I think perhaps the simplest way to define it is to define it as a free movement of goods, capital, and labor, and people. Free movement means movement without borders. Right? It's not very difficult to move capital, right? You can sit at home on the internet website and move capital electronically, right? Have you guys seen the Lord of the Rings? No? How many saw Lord of the Rings? You remember the ring? When you turn the ring, what happens? When you turn the ring, what happens then? You're invisible. It's like capital. When you click mouse on your screen, it's invisible, right? And cannot be controlled, really. So it's fairly easy to move capital. It's a little bit less easy to move goods across national borders, right? There's still, I mean, there is an organization called World Trade Organization. It used to be GATT, which means General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade, right? The World Trade Organization basically says that all countries who are members of the World Trade Organization have to allow for the free movement of goods across national borders, right? Why is that important? Why is it important to move freely goods across national borders? Does anybody have an answer? What's good about freedom of movement of goods? Yes, you have to wait for the microphone. And now I'm looking at the watch, 5 minutes. Yes, what's good about moving goods across national borders?
Some parts of the world can't produce certain goods that others can, and to be able to trade those goods or move those goods across national borders can help to increase economic stability or just provide for needs of certain countries.
Excellent. Yes, yes. I wouldn't have said it better myself, right? I mean, the freedom of the necessity of moving goods freely across national borders has become very apparent during Great Depression, right? In the 1930s, right? Let's say you produce too much of a certain good, right? You produce too much of it, and if you can't sell it at home, where can you sell it? You try to sell it abroad, right? But what happened during Great Depression was that countries started to close their borders towards foreign goods, because each country, each industrial country, was making too much of their goods too. So why would I take goods from abroad if I already have too much at home, right? What happened? Did closing of borders improve economic situation, or did it deteriorate? Did it go better or worse? Worse, yes. So one of the big lessons of Great Depression was never close the borders. Do not close the borders when there is a crisis. And that's why we have international organizations such as International Monetary Fund and things like that to basically ensure that it doesn't happen. People are the problem. Moving of labor is a problem. Ideal market would be, I mean, many people in the West, especially here in the United States, are saying, we are for free market. Raise your hands. How many of you are for free market? Only one person? 2 people? 3? 4? Okay. All right. We are for free market, but how many of you are for free movement of people across national borders? If you want to work in Mexico, why don't you go in Mexico and work? If you go to work in France, why don't you freely just go to France to work? If people want to come here to work without any problems, without any green cards, immigration processes, why can't they just come here and work and that's it? How many of you are for a policy like that? The same number as for You're not telling me the truth, I think, here, but I'm sorry, what?
Oh, we were just talking about why it wouldn't be a good thing. Plus, if you're qualified to do the job, you might as well do it. You know, if they can't find someone to fill that position, somebody from another country.
But why would an American have advantage over Albanian or a Croatian? Why wouldn't companies search for talent all across? Some companies do, but most don't, right? Why wouldn't GRCC go and search for talent all over the world?
Well, it comes down to what's needed. So middle class, like industrial jobs, a lot of people can do those without a lot of skill. But for anything higher, high skill, high pay jobs, you need people that are more well educated. So if you stay inside of your own country, you're probably not going to find all of those people. I mean, even in the United States, of 100 jobs that are high skill, high pay, 20 can be taken by Americans. The rest have to be insourced. So they have to bring people from outside to take those jobs.
Right, but still, I mean, most companies do not advertise all around the world. Some do. Global companies do advertise all around the world, and people, domestic population does have the advantage. I mean, people in the United States are complaining about illegal immigrants. Mexican government is saying, why don't you accept more immigrants from Mexico in the United States? But at the same time, Mexico has one of the toughest immigration policies in the world. It's really hard to move to Mexico and work legally. It's harder than to move from outside of the United States into the United States and work legally. It's much harder. Mexico is not an immigration country. Right? So all countries in the world basically give preferential treatment to their domestic population. And when you think about it, why is that? Why is that? If we agree with the premise of the free market, right? Why don't we have the market that is absolutely free, right? Which means free movement of capital, free movement of goods across national borders, free movement of labor, right? We miss certain labor in Michigan. Why would not we import a bunch of people from Romania, right? Or from all over the world to do it, right? Why do we have to cry and say, well, there is high unemployment in Michigan, but there is not enough qualified people, so places like GRCC have to do education programs, right? Why don't we just skip education programs? I'm talking about against GRCC now? No. So I'm just joking. So why wouldn't they go to other places? Think about it. I mean, what is the reason? Why do we prefer our own, right, as opposed to others? Yes, you have an answer to that question? Yeah. Okay.
We would prefer that the unemployment rate in our own country is low and that we're able to employ the people that live in our country and are a part of this nation, and to be able to...
Why? Why do we like our nation more than others? Is there economic reason for it? Yeah.
I'd personally say nationalism. The whole world on it today. I mean, we have civic cultures, so I mean that's what would drive people to invest in our own.
Yes, yes. Very good. Yes, nationalism. Nationalism is a force everywhere, not only in the United States, everywhere. Right? We always prefer our own community towards others. Right? Remember high school? I would like to be in a certain community and exclude others. Hopefully in college people become more inclusive, right? And ways in which nations try to resolve this problem of outsiders coming into their communities to build walls. Right? Nations build walls. Some nations build walls not only around their borders, but also some nations build walls within their cities, right? To separate one community from other. Let me show. I don't know. I like walls, so I put. How many of you like walls? Anybody likes walls? Huh? Like doors better? Gates? Yeah. This is one of my favorite walls. Right? This is a wall between West Bank and Israel. Israel built that wall to prevent people from West Bank to come in. Does it look impressive? It has a tower. Look at how tall it is. Of course, Israel is claiming it's for the security purposes. They do not want Palestinian terrorists to enter Israel and basically threaten its security. This is a smaller wall. This is, well, smaller territory calls for smaller walls. This is a smaller wall. This is a wall between Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip is another one. There are two Palestinian territories. One is West Bank. Maybe I can show you on the map. I'll show you on the map. I have to end the show, but okay. So this is Israel, right? Hopefully I'll press the correct button and nothing will explode, right? Okay, all right. Oh, okay, in the wrong direction, all right. All right, so this is Israel, right? You see, a small country, only 6 million people, right? 5 million Jews, 1 million Arabs, right? So this is West Bank, right? This speck of blue is West Bank, right? That's a bank. It's called West Bank because it's a west bank of Jordan River, right? Jordan River separates Jordan, the country of Jordan, right, from Israel, and then here from so-called West Bank. West Bank is basically a refugee camp. Right? If you go to Iran and listen to the TV news, then the TV news anchor will never mention that Israel exists. When something happens in Israel, they refer to it as Palestine. Yes. Yesterday, they said there were 6 people killed in a suicide attack in Palestine. They never mentioned the name of Israel. They do not want to recognize, even by words, that Israel exists. So this is the wall. Oops, what happened? This is the wall. The wall that I showed you, the first one is the one between, it's between here. It's right here, it's right here, between Israel and West Bank. It's right here. And then the smaller wall, right? The smaller wall is the wall between Gaza Strip and Israel, right? So basically Israel is surrounded by walls that prevent people from coming in. Palestinians from coming in. Palestinians, through this smaller wall, Palestinians just dig tunnels underneath. Do you know where this is? Anybody? Have you been to Arizona? Yeah, this is a wall between the United States and Mexico. in the state of Arizona. I think it's an excellent photo. Isn't it an excellent photo? It's so nice and wavy. And this is obviously the US Border Patrol truck right here. Right? This is what the United States has built between Arizona and Mexico. Right? I find this photo very ironic. It's an Obama immigration summit, and there is a guy trying to climb the wall from Mexico into the United States. That's a wall in Texas. I think if people who say it's a picture says 1,000 words, I think they're right. They're right. This is not a wall, but it has a function of a wall. This is a border between Morocco and Spain. I can show you on the map. I'm so proud that I have a map. See, right here. Okay. You see here, right here, right? This is the country of Spain. This is country of Morocco, right? Morocco is obviously northern African country, right? Here's the Morocco and Spain are separated by the Strait of Gibraltar, right? The Strait of Gibraltar is partly under the ownership of Great Britain and partly under the ownership of Spain. Has anybody been to Gibraltar? No, I remember Gibraltar because I was driving 25 hours from Gibraltar to Croatia. So this is probably the only reason why I remember Gibraltar, which is just a huge rock with great restaurants. But I think it's barbed wire. You see, it's barbed wire between Morocco and Spain, and it's electrified. It's a border between the developed world and developing world. It's a border between us and them. You know, Europe prides itself on its liberal principles, but look at what they built. Right? And they have little towers, right, to basically control what's happening, so that immigrants from the developed world cannot freely cross into from Morocco to Spain. So on the one hand, we are trying to build free movement of capital and goods, but when we are thinking about labor from other places, we are not so sure. Sometimes we build walls. We build walls because we are afraid of those who might come and take away our economic well-being and take away our cultural heritage and take away our way of life, as they say. Right? Let me show you another wall. This wall is not between countries. This wall is in a city. Has anybody seen this wall before? Has anybody been to Italy? This is a wall in the city of Padua in Italy. It's in the middle of the city. What do you think it separates? Just a guess. What do you think this wall separates? Anybody?
Different classes of people?
Yeah. Part of the immigrant part of the city, right? From the whites. That was the wall. This wall was built in '97. It is not a remain of a previous era. The city of Padua, which is one of the most beautiful cities in Italy, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. You should go to Padua and see the real walls of Padua, right? Although this is a very real wall too. This wall separates the poor from the rich and upper middle class. Because the city of Padua thought that immigrants who come to the city of Padua, immigrants who come to Italy from usually Northern African countries are the ones who has to be separated from the rest of us, right? Or from the rest of them, because they will just destroy the city. Right? So they're put in a sort of a ghetto to live behind this wall. You see that just next to the wall is apartment complex for the poor immigrants. Right? This is apartment complex. Just imagine the view that you have if you live on the first floor. You wake up every morning and there is a wall just in front of your bedroom. And it's not, once again, it's not between countries. It's in one city, in a developed state. It's not like we are separating Morocco from Spain. We are separating one part of a highly rich, developed country from another part in the one city. Yes. What is European Union? I think I shocked you enough with the walls, so I can talk about European Union. European Union is a collection of 27 countries. The main criterion that basically tells you, the main criterion for being a member of the European Union, of course, is to be a European country. That's the main criterion. That looks harder, that is harder than it looks, actually. Morocco is claiming to be a European country. So Morocco would like to be, you remember Morocco, connected with or separated by the Strait of Gibraltar, right? Russia is not sure whether it's European or not, right? Israel is sort of thinking about it. What do we do with Turkey? I mean, if you are a European country and you are Turkey, what do we do with Turkey? Let me show you where Turkey is, right here on the map. It's right here, right? So official border between Europe and Asia is the border right there, Istanbul. Istanbul is basically the city in two worlds, on two continents. And Western Istanbul is a city in Europe, and East Istanbul is, anybody been to Istanbul? You should travel. East Istanbul is definitely a place in Asia, right? So being a European country is not as easily determined as it might look, right? Many countries are claiming to be in Europe just in order to become members of the European Union. Turkey has been negotiating with the European Union to enter the European Union from 1987. They've been negotiating since 1987. That's like 25 years ago they started negotiating. And they haven't moved. They haven't moved in the process of negotiations at all. So this European Union is not just a random group of countries. I mean, European Union has common institutions. We are not sure whether we are something called intergovernmental organization or we are something called supranational organization. Countries disagree of who European or what European Union is, right? Intergovernmental organization would mean that most of the power in the European Union remains with the states, with the member states, right? So it's sort of confederation, right? Most of the power remains within the states. And if you call yourself intergovernmental organization, then most of the power remains within the states. But if you call yourself supranational organization, that means that you as a country give up certain powers to organizations outside of that country. Right? And European Union does have such organization. It has a European Council, right? It has a European Commission, it has European Parliament. Right? People in Europe can directly vote for the members of European Parliament, in addition to voting for their domestic parliaments. And Europe is based on 3 pillars. They call them pillars. So it's justice and home affairs, and immigration belongs to justice and home affairs. It's foreign policy, right? And economic community, single market and monetary union. Single market simply means that there are not obstacles to trade, but we saw that there are people obstacles. Monetary union simply means that all countries use the same currency. This is not entirely true in Europe, right? Some countries do not use euro. Great Britain does not use euro. Denmark does not use euro. So some countries would like to keep their monetary policies alive without using euro. So that's the European Union. European Union, so it's a group of 27 countries who don't really know what they are together. Some people think it's supranational organization, which means institutions such as the European Council and European Parliament and European Commission are basically telling other countries what to do. Others are thinking that European Union is intergovernmental organization. Intergovernmental organization means that most of the powers remains with the countries rather than these powers being transferred to these European institutions. We sort of have a split personality. We don't know who we are yet. I mean, the European Union was established in 1952, right? As a European coal and steel community, right? So it's still, I mean, we're still young, right? so it's still time to, analogously, we are in college years. In college years, you people are searching for your personal identities, right? You're like, who am I really, right? we are in terms of being a group of countries, we are in college, right? We are trying to find out who we really are as a group, right? Who we really are as a group. Immigration numbers in European Union. Right? European Union population is 500 million people, 502. That's the latest census from 2010, sorry. Yes. 502 million people. The United States has around 300 million people. Right? Immigrant population born outside of Europe, 32 million. Europe has around 32 million people born outside of Europe who live in Europe, meaning European Union, actually. That's around 6% of the population. Does anybody know how many first-generation foreign-born immigrants live in the United States? Not illegal immigrants. How many legal immigrants? How many legal immigrants? First-year foreign-born legal immigrants in the United States. Anybody knows? What's a guess? 500,000? No. 40 million? Okay.
Probably
10 to 15 million? Yeah. It's very similar to Europe. It's around 30 million people. 30 million legal first-generation foreign-born. Right? Around 30 million people. The United States government is claiming around 12 million illegal immigrants. So if you put legal and illegal together, it's around 42 million people who are not born in the United States, and they are first generation, right? Or second generation in terms of illegal immigrants, right? And they live in the United States, right? European Union does not have a cap on how many legal immigrants they can receive. This is very strange. There is no cap. There is no limit. There is no limit that says this is how many immigrants can enter European Union. Does the United States have the limit in terms of legal immigration? Yes? Does anybody know what the limit is? You have to stay silent before the microphone.
It's different for every country.
But altogether, there is a federal law. And
it's different for every country.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. But there is a federal law that basically caps the number of legal immigrants in the United States, 227,000 per year. That's the congressional cap. 227,000 employment-based immigrants, the people who would like to come in the United States to live and work. 227,000. That's the number determined by the Congress. In 1961, it hasn't changed since, right? 140,000 family reunifications. So altogether, 367,000 per year legal immigrants. As far as illegal immigrants through Mexico, it's been around 230,000 last year, but in 2005 it was almost 600,000. Because of the economic crisis, the tempo, the rate of illegal immigration, the number of the people every year who illegally come into the United States has plummeted. So on the one hand, the United States does have a cap, right? On the other hand, the European Union does not have a cap. The European Union admits legally around 1.5 million people a year, as opposed to 360,000 into the United States, 1.5 million. Yes, the European Union does have more people, the higher population, but the European Union is only 1/3 of the United States of America, only 1/3 in terms of the territory. You can basically fit three European unions into the United States. So we are just 1/3 of the territory, and we still receive almost 5 times as many immigrants per year. Without a cap. There is no cap, there's no quota. There's no limit how many legal immigrants can enter European Union. Europe does not discriminate, despite all these problems, right? Despite the cultural problems, despite the economic problems, despite the welfare state problems, Europe does not discriminate based on the country of origin or race in terms of accepting legal immigrants. The United States does. Not openly. But if you're a Chinese person, right, you have to wait much longer than if you're a Croatian person. They tell you it's not because of racial or ethnic or national discrimination. It's because there are already so many Chinese people, right, that we want to basically reduce the influx of Chinese and many other Asian nations, right? Because there are so many of them here in the United States, and therefore we have to reduce the number. Europe does not think about that, although it has very strong political proponents who would like it to change. A lot of politicians in Europe would like to reduce immigration from Muslim countries because they're saying Muslims do not share one of the basic values of Western politics, which is the separation between church and state. Oops, why did I do that? No. Okay. Look at this. This is cramming them in, right? This is ironic title of a British Parliament. How do we cram all the immigrants in? This is the number of immigrants in top 12 countries in Europe. You just have to add another 0. So a non-US national in Spain, 4.99 million, almost 5 million people in Spain. Spain has around 55 million people, so a little bit less than 10% of the population is foreign-born, right? Non-EU-born, right? Outside of Europe, right? UK, 3.07 million, and so on and so forth, right? The Netherlands is a small country, right? The size of the Netherlands is a little bit bigger than Los Angeles in terms of the land area. Right? So Netherlands has 390,000 foreign-born, outside of Europe-born immigrants, but look at the density to each square kilometer, 398 people per square kilometer, because it's so very small. So you can drive from one side of Netherlands to another in just 2 hours, less than 2 hours, 1 hour and 45 minutes. Yes. North, south, and east, west. Right? It's so small. This is even more interesting. Look at the religious composition of immigrants in the European Union. This is the religious composition that basically includes all immigrants, which means immigrants from other European countries, from within Europe, right? From outside European Union, right? There are countries in Europe that are outside of European Union, right? Ukraine, Croatia, Albania, Bosnia, and so on and so forth, right? So this is the religious composition, 56% Christian, but look at the second largest population, 27% of immigrants in the European Union, including those who came from other European Union, from other European countries, 27. Look at if you exclude European countries. If you exclude countries in Europe, right, then 42% of immigrants into European Union from outside of Europe are Christian, and then 39, huge number, 39% of basically immigrants from outside European countries are Muslim. That's a huge challenge. For many European politicians, that is a huge challenge. In order to process these immigrants, European Union creates detention centers. These are the faces of immigrants in the European Union. This is detention center in Greece. Many immigrants from Asia, from Asian countries, who want to get into the European Union are coming through Greece. So Greece first put them into these detention centers, right? They look a little bit like concentration camps, just a little bit. And then they process them. And they basically accept around 25%, and then the rest 75% is deported back from where they came from. Common EU immigration policy. What are the bases on which you can basically claim your right to enter the European Union as a legal immigrant? What are the bases? What are the criteria? Work. You can come to the European Union to work legally, according to the rules set by the European Union. Right? Common EU immigration policy is relatively new. It comes from 2009. Before 2009, each European Union country had its own immigration policies, right? But since 2009, the European Union wanted basically to make immigration policies common, to basically create policies that will be valid for all countries in the European Union. Right? These policies are coming from the European Commission. Right? There is something called blue card. I'm a foreigner in this country, so when I got my green card, I was really surprised that it's green. I also thought it was blue. But in Europe, when you get right to work, right, you get a blue card. This blue card, however, is only what my student Philip here was talking about later before. This blue card is only for highly skilled and educated immigrants. You can get a blue card only if you have a college degree in the field basically that is sought after in European countries, in the countries of European Union. This blue card is only valid for 2 years at first, right? And then you can extend it to 5 years, and then 10 years, and then after 10 years you have the right to a citizenship of your resident country where you live in Europe. And the United States gives you a green card regardless of what kind of education you have. You can get a green card for work, and you don't have to have any possible degree. You don't have to even have an elementary school degree. Is there an elementary school degree? Yeah, in Europe there is. Even if you didn't go to elementary school, you can still theoretically get a green card. But blue card does not work in Europe. Just having elementary education does not work in Europe if you want to get the blue card, right? You can get only seasonal permit in a European Union country. If you do not have a college degree, you can only get seasonal permit for seasonal work. It's low and medium skill work, right? Pick strawberries, work in the construction, so on and so forth, right? In the United States, you can get a green card, which is permanent residence. You can get it even if you do medium and low skill work. Right? In Europe, you cannot get permanent residence, at least not at first, if you do not have a college degree. So those of you who would like to live in Europe, graduate from college. In engineering, or math, or science, something like that, right? Family reunification. Family reunification is another important criterion that basically allows people to get into European Union legally and to be residents. Right? Family reunification, what is different between the United States and European Union, that European Union does recognize same-sex couples. So if you're a gay person and you want to bring your partner from your country of origin, you can do that. And you can even bring a person of a different gender you are not married to. You can claim that this person lives with you as your partner, as a, how do you call it here in the United States? Common law relationship, something like that. Yes, common law, yeah. So if I came to Croatia and I had a wife, if I came to Germany and I had a wife in Croatia, not wife, if I had a woman in Croatia who is not my wife, hopefully my wife will not watch this presentation, but if something like that was true, I could bring my woman, sort of, right, my partner, my female partner, right, to Germany and give her the legal residence in that particular country. This is not possible in the United States, right? In the United States, if you claim family unification, you either have to be a blood relative of the people who are here, or you have to basically be married. In some countries in Europe, you have also the long-term residence test. If you are basically a long-term resident in a particular country, then that country may, depending on the country, but that country may give you citizenship automatically. For example, Great Britain, if you manage to be a legal resident in Great Britain for at least 5 years, one day after 5 years, you'll just receive British passport in the mail. Right? Here in the United States, you have to have green card for 5 years, and then you can apply for citizenship. You have to pass a test that I need to give to my students, citizenship test about American politics. And basically then the United States government allows you to have. So in some aspects, the United States immigration system is more liberal than the other aspects. However, European immigration system is more liberal in terms of basically how they treat gay couples and common law communities, people who are not married. Polygamy, it's not recognized. You cannot claim I have more than one wife or more than one husband. I need to bring them into European Union country. That doesn't work. Not yet. It may be changed. Yes, you have a case like that? Or?
Just claim that they're mistresses.
I'm sorry, what? The mistresses, yes. Yeah. multiple common law partners, yes. That would be interesting, yes. Yes, so the crucial question from the political point of view is how well are non-European immigrants integrated in the politics of their host EU countries? You see that boat with immigrants? This is the boat that went from Tunisia. You remember Arab Revolution, right? Arab Spring, actually. It started in March of 2011 in Tunisia, right? And this is the Tunisian immigrants on the boat last March, who are basically trying to reach the coast of Italy. Doesn't look like a very safe boat. It seems that too many people on that boat, right? But this is just one of many immigrant boats that, not only in 2011, but previously, this is the way in which immigrants from Northern Africa are trying to reach European coast. But to go back to our crucial question, so how well are non-European immigrants integrated in the politics of their host countries? Many people who do research on European immigration are using something called imagined communities theory. Imagined communities theory is basically saying that all of us belong to imagined communities. Let's say all of us belong to a community who listen to a certain kind of music. All of us belong to a community that practices certain religion. All of us belong to a community that has certain values towards the government, towards certain political values, right? All of us belong to a community, perhaps of students, right? Many anthropologists, and my colleague Dylan may correct me, but many anthropologists think in terms of these imagined communities, right? Because how do you decide whether to accept a certain person in a community or not? It depends on the values of the community you belong to, right? Some communities are more inclusive than others, right? But the basic premise is that we humans are social creatures, right? And we need people around us. We need to belong to something, to a community. Right? When Erich Fromm, famous German sociologists and philosophers, wrote his famous book, Escape from Freedom, he's saying, well, freedom is just not belonging to anything, and people don't like that. People don't like freedom of not belonging to anything. We want to belong. I mean, I cannot just stand in front of the mirror every morning and say, oh, I'm great, which I usually do, right? But I'm great. I mean, I need others to tell me I'm great too, right? I need approval from others, right? So I imagine that I belong to a certain community. This is what makes me sane. This is what makes all of us sane and alive, that we imagine that we belong to certain communities, right? And Michael Walzer, anthropologist, thinks that there are two types of moralities that communities have. One morality is something called thick morality, and another morality is something called thin morality. Let me explain this, hopefully, on the basis of picture. Does anybody know where this picture is coming from? Tiananmen Square, that's 1989. Right? This is a student demonstration. Student demonstrations who wanted basically political reforms in the country of China. Right? This guy is trying to stop the tanks. He's just standing in front of a tank. And this guy is trying to stop the tanks that are basically driving towards Tiananmen Square to quell the rebellion, to crush it, which they succeeded in. Right? When you look at these photos, can you understand the meaning of these photos? If you could tell me the meaning of these photos in just 2 or 3 words. Defiance, very good, right? Fight between, or struggle between, I'm sorry? Good and evil. Good, struggle between good and evil, right? Struggle between, yes.
Underdog and power.
Very good, yes, underdog and power. Struggle between liberty and oppression. Very good, yes. Would you agree that all of us, all humans, regardless of where they live in the world, could understand the meaning of this photo without many words? How many of you say yes? Raise your hand. Yeah. Yes. Most people in the world would be able to understand the meaning of this photo, regardless of what culture they belong to, right? Yes? Yes. That's, according to Walter, is thin morality, right? Understand the fact that people from different cultures can understand the meaning of that photo means that this kind of morality, this kind of values, the values of freedom versus oppression, the value of power against outsider, weakness or whatever, right, is easily spread, is thin, right? People from all cultures can understand it, right? That's what thin morality means. People, for all cultures can understand it, right? Look at this, what is this? Christmas tree, right? Look at this, I have Mountain Dew, I don't know, I just, that's Mountain Dew Christmas tree, right? When you look at the Christmas tree, does it bring memories? Yeah. Does it bring stories? Yes. Does it bring warmth? What about people in the cultures who do not celebrate Christmas? When they look at the Christmas tree, do they have the same feelings like you guys have? No. I mean, Christmas can be only understood in terms of the stories that it invokes. In the cultures that celebrate that holiday in a positive way. And that's what Walter would be an example of thick morality, because Christmas is not really easily shared with the cultures who do not celebrate it, right? This picture about fight between liberty and oppression is easily shared, right? Everybody, almost if I was doing this presentation in Johannesburg, South Africa, right, people would say, oh, well, that's oppression versus liberty, right? And if I put it here, they would say, okay, well, it's Christmas, we heard about it, but but what? The thick morality is basically morality that is just so thick, it's really difficult to spread it towards people who are outside of the culture. Yes. So the real question is here, let me put the right slide. The real question is here, who is entitled to belong to the sacred community, right? Some of you mentioned nationalism at the beginning of this lecture, right? Nationalism is basically a thick morality, right? Nationalism is saying, or this notion that we should give preference in employment policies, for example, right? That we should give preference to to members of our own community, right? This kind of set of values is thick. It's not spread. We are saying we do not want to spread the blessings of this country to others if you don't really have to. Right? Although George Bush may disagree and go to Iraq to do it, right? Right. And Walter's definition, imagine communities become relevant to people if they offer answers to questions that modern political ideologies do not answer, such as questions about life, death, and continuity, right? I mean, all of us live fairly sane lives if we have good stories. We know how we came to this world, what kind of community we belong to, what is the meaning of life and death. If we are religious people, we think, well, death certainly has some meaning, right? And things like that, right? But these stories are crucial. So people who do not share these stories with us, right, are excluded. And for us, for many Americans, many Westerners, the country is sacred. We think of our country as a sacred community. So the real question here is, how do we basically say who is entitled to belong to this sacred community of ours if you subscribe to nationalism, which many people in European countries do, right? Many people in European countries are saying, why would these people with different religions and different skin colors come to our country and ruin whatever we have been building for centuries and centuries, right? These stories about life and death and holidays that we cherish and food that we eat and the way we pray, the way we think about it, why would these people come and basically undermine that, right? And this is strongly connected in terms of how people in Europe believe, whether people in Europe believe that immigrants, non-European immigrants, should be integrated in the political process or not. If you think that if you hold your country sacred, if those Europeans who hold their country sacred, who think of their country as a sacred community with certain set of strong cultural values, they are not very well inclined to think that non-European immigrants should be included into the political process. Those who are more cosmopolitan, who basically share this value of thin morality, those who are saying, okay, maybe our community is not that sacred, maybe the world is more sacred than the country, or maybe individual human is more sacred than the community, right? Those are more inclined to think that immigrants should be accepted. Example of Italy, right? Why did I choose the example of Italy? Because most of the immigrants, Muslim immigrants from Northern Africa, are going to Italy, right? Look at the numbers. I mean, the number of immigrants, non-European immigrants, triples in Italy between 1991 and 2001, and doubled by 2007. Currently, there are 4.2 million non-European immigrants, people from outside of Europe, mostly African Muslims, right? In Italy, that's 7% of the population, right? That basically powered the Northern League. Northern League is not a Nazi party, but Northern League is a political party which basically advocates the separation between North and South Italy, right? South Italy is the place where most of these immigrants from Africa come, right? Northern League wants to basically prevent the undermining of traditional Italian culture. As they said, cleanliness of Italy, keep Italy tidy, they're saying, right? In Italian, of course. And how can we keep Italy tidy? What Italians are saying, what the Northern League is saying, well, what we want to do is basically to separate North from the South, so that the North is this nice, tidy place for the white upper middle class, right? And the South is this dirty place, right? Full of poor immigrants from Africa. Remember that wall in Padua? Yeah. That's a symbol of that kind of thinking. France is also a very interesting country. France is interesting because despite so many attempts to crush immigration into France, France still does not have any quotas, does not limit the amount of immigrants, does not discriminate in terms of their racial or ethnic backgrounds or national backgrounds, right? And despite all the attempts to crush immigration into France, since 1950s, the numbers have never dropped below 100,000 annually. I mean, the United States receives 360,000 immigrants per year legally, right? But the United States has six times more people. And it's 20 times larger than France. France receives 100,000 a year. Now more, 170,000 last year, actually. It basically forbade Muslim girls to wear hijab, the scarf around the head, in order to say everybody's French, and we cannot basically connect church and state in schools, right? It is trying to forbid in many ways, free labor market for immigrants, right? It is also, France is also basically requiring every legal immigrant who comes to France to give allegiance to French Republic. If you go to France and you are a sociological researcher and you ask French government to give you data about the nationality of immigrants, national origins of immigrants in France, they're going to tell you we don't have it. Everybody's French in France. You're from Algeria, you're from Morocco, you're from any number of former French colonies, right? We don't have that data. Everybody's French. Why are you asking us about that? You have to basically immediately within the first month of becoming a legal French immigrant, you have to permanent resident from abroad, from yeah, either from European or non-European country, you have to pledge your allegiance to France. Why is that? I think many researchers are saying that's because France still has this strong Republican principles. When I say Republican, I do not mean Republican Party. I mean principles of égalité, fraternité, and liberté, right? Equality, fraternity, and liberty, despite so many attempts in France to basically reduce the immigration because of economic crisis, because of cultural reasons. In 1991, French President Mitterrand said that every country has an immigration tipping point, right? This immigration tipping point means that after that tipping point, foreign people in your country basically cause xenophobia, right? Cause hatred, cause violence, and so on and so forth. So I would say that both Italy and France are trying basically to practice thin morality of inclusiveness. Right? Despite all the nationalist forces that are both in Italy and France, which are highly immigration countries in Europe, they're both trying to practice that. Italy, for example, last year granted permanent residence and citizenship to over 2 million immigrants who have lived there more than 5 years. And France, as I already mentioned, despite many attempts to crush immigration from non-European countries, it's still going very strong in terms of how many people it accepts. And neither Italy nor France have any quotas or any kind of racial and ethnic discrimination in that particular sense. Once again, Europe is struggling to resolve this tension between the need to have immigrants and this fear that it has from these immigrants, and these are some of the attempts to solve that tension. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
If you have a question, just raise your hand so I can bring the microphone over to where you are and we'll capture it on the tape.
I have a question. I'm wondering, how did communism affect the European Union?
What do you mean?
Basically how Russia took over most of Eastern Europe. Mm-hmm. How did that affect the countries? Were they kicked out?
In terms of immigration or in?
Yeah. And just joining the Union, or were countries excluded?
Yeah, most of the countries in the former East Bloc that used to be under the Russian influence and control, most of these countries are today in the European Union, right? You have all the Baltic countries in the European Union, you have all the Eastern European countries in the European Union. Most of these countries who are now in the European Union and are from Eastern Europe see the Russian rule as just a blip on the radar, right? Just a very short, it was only 50 years. Then 50 years for many of these countries is a fairly short amount of time, right? All of these countries have always claimed that they culturally belong to the West. So joining the European Union for many Eastern European countries was not only necessary for economic reasons, right? I think perhaps some of them would even fare better economically if they didn't join, right? But that's another story. But it's primarily cultural reasons, right? So before these countries joined the European Union, you had a situation in Eastern Europe in which all political parties agreed about one thing: joining the European Union. Because people were so tired of oppression of the culture they see it foreign to their values, which is the Soviet Union, right? Communist culture, right? That they basically wanted to prove to themselves that they are worthy of the West. They're basically joining Eastern European countries. When they joined the European Union, they felt like they're coming home, right? Because they always said they were part of the West before. Russians were there for 50 years, and now it's finally over, Right? But they were saying Czech Republic, Hungary, they were saying, oh, we were part of Austro-Hungarian Empire for 400 years, so what is 50 years in terms of the Soviet Union? So it was basically even more important, very important for them to join more culturally than even economically or politically. Right? Because before they joined, they were already economically integrated, so nothing much has changed, but culturally changed. People started to feel that they belong. They finally are in the place they belong to. Yeah. Yeah, there is one in the back.
My question is, with the emergence of a lot of organizations, these intergovernmental, international organizations like the UN and the European Union, do you see the globally speaking, people moving towards less of maybe more organization as a whole in the future, kind of moving away from the United States and Russia and kind of moving on to more of a global mindset? And if that's the case, do you think the loss of culture and the acceptance of like these, what do you call them, the thin
morality.
Yeah, the thin morality, people moving more towards the thin morality, do you think that's happening? And also, do you think that losing cultural values could be a positive thing or a negative thing? Because that does keep us together as a people and gives us that foundation psychologically to have union between each other, but also it creates a divide sometimes and gives us a reason to put up those walls. So could that be, I guess, do you see that as a positive or a negative, losing that in the long term? And also, do you think that's what the world is moving towards, a lot of these nations, more of an open thing and less of a, this is my nation, less of a closed-minded mindset?
Oh, okay, thank you. That's a very complicated question, actually. It took me half an hour to answer all that. But do I see people moving towards a global mindset or thin morality? I don't think so, no. I would say that when people are in especially economic crisis, they move much more towards a thick morality because they want to protect, naturally, they want to protect their group from the intrusion of others who are there, perhaps, we think, that they are there to take away our livelihood, our well-being, our good life, and so on and so forth. But Immanuel Kant, although wrote in Perpetual Peace, that's his famous short book where he was arguing for basically abolishment of states, right? He thought that if people abolish states, that all wars would stop, because who wages wars but states, right? So if we didn't have states, we wouldn't have wars, right? But ideally he said, I would like to have the world without governments at all, right? So the world would just be in one huge space where we would just freely move from one place to the other, right? But he also recognized that this is something that most people would not accept. So he sort of proposed a compromise. He said, instead of just abolishing states totally, let's have one world state, right? But the organizations that you are talking about, such as United Nations, for example, is not a world state, right? It's just a collection of countries, right? And as a collection of countries, I mean, you see what's happening with Syria and the United Nations, right? Some countries are for tougher sanctions, others are against it, right? But there is the United Nations as a whole, right? Cannot order these countries what to do, right? So if certain countries are against certain actions of an organization in the United Nations, they can definitely be against it. European Union is a bit different. European Union has a common currency. Most countries are in that common currency. It has common border policies, right? So if you, for example, want to immigrate into European Union for political reasons, you don't like what's happening in your country, then the first safe country in which you immigrate has to accept you, right? You cannot move to another country unless you get a special permit, right? But it's still really cultural, right? Culture is still a very strong force. So I don't think that there is a globalization of culture in that particular sense, that we are all becoming the same. I don't think so, no. Because, I mean, in the 80s and 90s, there are a bunch of authors who wrote about globalization as Americanization. They were going around the world and seeing young people listening to American music and rock and roll, not rock and roll, well, yeah. And accepting American sort of way of life, and I don't know, on some youth radio stations in Europe, you can hear anchors using a lot of Americanized words and things like that. But I don't think that that's sign of a big fundamental change in culture, right? I mean, I'm still Croatian, and Brits will always be Brits, and French, and so on and so forth. So I think we are able to accept parts of foreign culture and thus become more connected towards others. But we'll still deeply basically remain who we are in terms of our personal history, background, and things like that, right? I see the younger generations in Croatia today, their values, they accept so-called specifically Croatian values from their parents and younger generations and things like that. It's not something, they're not globalized. They're globalized in terms of the music they listen to, they're globalized in terms of computer machines they use and things like that, but they're not globalized in the sense of how they see the world, right? For example, this crazy discussion about constitutionality of healthcare law the past 3 days. For us, that's totally non-understandable. Why would you want to discuss personal liberty when the health of people is at stake? I mean, that's regardless of how much American music I listen to, that's something that I can intellectually understand, but I cannot identify with it, neither I can emotionally accept it. So I think we are able as humans to accept little parts and bits of culture, but it doesn't change fundamentally who culturally we are. So.
What about over the long term, though? I mean, assuming nothing.
Well, as Kay.
Years, if nothing changes, and we kept moving along this path.
Yes. As Steve's favorite economist said, in long term we are all dead. Second favorite, sorry. But I don't know the answer to that question. So far, I don't think that human cultural evolution basically gave us a reason that anything would fundamentally change in the future, but I in the sense of our being more totally thin as opposed to totally thick, as Jethro Tull would say, thick as a brick, right? No. but I don't know. I don't know the answer about 10,000 years. I know that I would pretty much safely bet on the answer no in the foreseeable future.